Yeah, there were people that came in, used to wonder why people used to play back then with big 10-gallon cowboy hats. And it's because
they pass them around.
Picture this. The crowd is roaring, flashbulbs ignite the stage, and there he is, Bob Dylan, frozen in time like a living myth, a god with a guitar, a prophet in sunglasses. To the world he's untouchable, a poetic warrior who reshaped music and redefined rebellion. But step behind the stage lights, and the story warps into something darker. Beyond the carefully crafted verses and iconic album covers lies a twisted maze of broken promises, scorched friendships, and betrayals whispered in backstage corners. This isn't the Dylan of record stores and Rolling Stone covers. This is the Dylan who shattered hearts without looking back, who used silence like a weapon, who disappeared when loyalty begged him to stay. And the truth? It's not just messy, it's explosive. And it starts long before the applause faded. It begins with a woman who once called him the love of her life, Joan Baez. She gave him her stage, her voice, her heart, and when she needed him most, he disappeared. The silence that followed wasn't just personal, it was political. To many it felt like Dylan had abandoned more than a lover. He had walked away from a cause. But that was just the first of many fractures. As the years passed, his love life unfolded like a shadowed labyrinth. Behind the scenes, whispered stories told of affairs stretching across cities, tour buses, and hotel rooms. Women became muses, then memories. One of them, Sarah, tried to bring calm after the storm, but even that sanctuary eventually shattered. And just when it seemed Dylan might finally find calm in the chaos, a new and unexpected storm rose. This time from across the Atlantic. John Lennon, a former comrade in countercultural arms, morphed into a quiet enemy. They had once shared the same pulse, the same urgency, the same fire, but as their visions began to diverge, admiration curdled into rivalry. Dylan's cryptic disdain met Lennon's sardonic wit. What the public saw were clever barbs in interviews. What insiders felt was an icy war beneath the surface. Two titans of rebellion who now eyed each other not with respect, but with sharpened suspicion. But the tension didn't end there. Even the very movements Dylan helped ignite, civil rights, anti-war, counterculture, began to feel abandoned. They had anointed him their prophet, their symbol, their unshakable voice. But Dylan recoiled. He shed the role like a snake shedding its skin, leaving behind stunned activists and betrayed followers who stared into the void he left.
Well, yeah, but you know, the first videos were the movies they used to make. You know, Little Richard, Bill Can't Help It, my favorite.
To Dylan, expectation was suffocation. He didn't just resist being labeled, he destroyed the labels entirely. What appeared to be aloofness was in truth a calculated escape. Like his literary hero Rimbaud, Dylan chose to vanish rather than conform. He torched bridges not out of spite, but survival. He ended friendships without explanation. He abandoned versions of himself like fading costumes. One day a prophet, the next a stranger. And always just out of reach. This wasn't a man retreating, it was a man rebelling against his own myth, burning the script before anyone could read the final act. Even among allies, cracks deepened. The band, once a sanctuary of sound, found themselves drifting from the man they supported. What began as camaraderie turned to quiet resentment. And by the time they shared the stage at the last waltz, smiles hid silent fractures that would never fully mend. He helped them rebuild their sound, but when the spotlight returned, he took center stage and left them in the margins. Stories trickled out about his control, his distance, his unwillingness to share the credit. The music endured, the friendships didn't. And Dylan once again walked away untouched, while others were left to carry the silence. And that silence echoes even louder in his lyrics. You can hear it in every breath he takes between verses, the guilt, the venom, the echoes of pain he dares not speak aloud. Dylan's songs are more than poetry set to music. They're sonic minefields, each line laced with unresolved rage and buried regret. These aren't ballads of closure. their letters never sent, confrontations never made, apologies never given. Listen to Idiot Wind, and you hear not just anger, but the roar of a relationship burned to ash, with no intention of sifting through the remains. In Positively 4th Street, there's no veiled meaning, just naked contempt wrapped in melody. Don't think twice, it's all right. That's not acceptance, it's heartbreak disguised as indifference. The sting is in the silences between the words, the way the chords bend like broken promises. Friends knew when he was singing about them. Lovers recognized themselves in the smoke. Enemies heard their defeat carved into vinyl. These songs aren't just music, they're emotional battlegrounds. Haunted by the people he left behind, Dylan turned his greatest weapon, his lyrics, into a confessional booth with no priest, no forgiveness, and no end in sight. And then came the turn no one expected. Dylan, reborn in gospel and faith, shed his past again, this time in flames. He didn't just change his lyrics, he changed his entire essence. Gone was the cryptic poet, the voice of the disillusioned youth. In his place stood a preacher, wild-eyed and unwavering, declaring salvation from the stage like a man possessed. He refused to play his old hits, the very songs that had built his myth and inspired a generation. Instead, he delivered gospel sermons through music, alienating longtime collaborators and leaving his bandmates in stunned silence. Some walked out, others stayed confused, loyal, or just hoping he'd come back to himself. Fans didn't know what to make of it. People who once worshipped his secular brilliance now heard him denounce everything they held dear. Critics skewered him, former allies turned their backs. And Dylan? He doubled down. He saw himself as reborn, saved from the abyss. But for many, it felt like abandonment. The prophet who once marched for civil rights, who railed against war and injustice, now seemed to belong to another cause entirely. A divine one, yes, but not theirs. What some saw as spiritual awakening, others experienced as betrayal of the counterculture. The man who once gave them protest anthems had found a new god and left his followers stunned, divided, and ultimately behind. Yet even new voices brought old tension. Patti Smith, once hailed as his successor, entered his orbit and felt the chill. In the late 70s, critics called her the female Dylan. Fans whispered that the torch had been passed. But Bob Dylan didn't take kindly to the idea of being replaced, even symbolically. Though he offered surface-level praise in interviews, those close to him saw something deeper, a simmering resentment, the kind that doesn't erupt, but erodes. When they toured together, the atmosphere was anything but collaborative. Smith later described the backstage dynamic as cold, tense, even surreal. Dylan would avoid eye contact. He'd offer cryptic half-sentences or simply drift into silence as though the air between them was too heavy to speak through. She felt unwelcome in the very spaces they were meant to share. Insiders recalled subtle acts of sabotage, last-minute set changes, technical errors that never seemed to occur during his own performances, and a general air of condescension disguised as mentorship. What was supposed to be a celebration of 2 generations of poetic fire became a quiet psychological battle. Smith once said being near him felt like trying to light a match in a storm. He was both the wind and the silence afterward. And that silence? It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, charged, and full of unsaid truths, like verses that never made it into the song. And when Dylan finally turned on his fans, the unraveling was complete. By the 1918s, Dylan was spiraling, not just creatively, but spiritually and emotionally. The icon who once held a nation in the palm of his hand now seemed like a ghost on stage. At concerts, he would arrive disheveled, his eyes distant, his voice erratic. Instead of poetic clarity, he offered cryptic rebukes. Instead of revered anthems, he delivered disjointed set lists, often rearranged to the point of unrecognizability. He scolded his audiences. He mocked the very songs that had made him a prophet. Classics like "Blowin' in the Wind" were mumbled, mangled, or avoided altogether. People who had waited decades to see him left in tears, confused or furious. Some booed, Some walked out in protest, shattered by the disconnect between legend and reality. But Dylan didn't flinch, or at least he refused to show it. To him, the audience wasn't always sacred. Sometimes it was the jailer reminding him of who he once was, of the version he no longer wished to be. And in those moments, Dylan lashed out. Not out of hatred, but out of a deep, aching desire to be free from their expectations. And so he unraveled in full view, daring his fans to love him not for who he had been, but for the stranger he was becoming. Because at his core, Dylan was never meant to be held. He was fire and fog, a shapeshifter who vanished the moment anyone tried to truly see him. He slipped through fingers like smoke, igniting everything in his wake, but never staying long enough to bask in the warmth. The cost? It was enormous, and it echoed in places no spotlight could reach. Behind every masterpiece stood a wreckage of trust. For every roaring ovation, there was someone in the wings nursing a heartbreak, a betrayal, a silence that spoke louder than any verse. Dylan didn't just revolutionize music. He scorched the path as he moved forward, leaving behind scorched earth and people still trying to understand how someone so brilliant could also be so cold. He wrote truths that moved millions, but rarely spoke the ones that could have healed a few. His songs were cathedrals of emotion, but in real life, he often locked the doors and threw away the key. And so we're left not just with his legacy, but with the long, lingering question it casts. Can someone change the world and still break the hearts of everyone closest to them? Bob Dylan didn't just walk away, he disappeared into legend. And the silence that followed, it wasn't peace. It was the echo of all the people he left behind, wondering if they were just chapters in his myth or the cost of his genius.